Right, should be going live any second now, if not now.
I think we're live, yeah. It's certainly giving that indication. So welcome everybody to the December meeting of the Council and Trade Union Joint Committee. We'll do sort of the usual bits and pieces before we get into sort of the meat of the agenda. But as ever, if you could just pop yourself on mute when you're not speaking, it will just prevent any sort of feedback that's happening. That'd be great. So number one, apologies for absence. I've got an apology from Councillor Bassam Mahfouz. Are there any other apologies? Keith?
Mary Lancaster.
Sorry. Oh. Yes, Mary Lancaster is the only one I'm aware of.
And Adam Smith will be joining us later on.
I think he's there.
There's an Adam's iPhone that's...
Yes. I'm here, sir.
Wonderful. Maybe, Keith, if you could rename Adam's iPhone to Adam Smith.
I will.
Is that, yeah?
Yeah, I will.
Thank you so much. Urgent matters. I don't believe that there are any declarations of interest. If not, there are no matters to be considered in private. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any corrections that anybody would like to seek from the minutes? Linda.
Can we agree those minutes, please? But we've got matters arising, if that's okay.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, do you want to do matters arising? Are they agreed?
Yes.
Agreed. Okay, thank you. And then matters arising, go ahead.
Okay, on page 8 of 38, about 2/3 of the way down, there's a bullet point which says no reports had come to Cabinet yet on the topic of non-standard workers, but a new report will be available by the end of November 2021. I don't know if I missed that one, or was that produced at all, Liz?
No, unfortunately, we haven't been able to run that report yet, but we'll definitely have it for the next meeting for you with an update on numbers, but we haven't got the report.
Thank you. And on page 9 of 38,
yeah.
This is about the staff survey. It's about approximately halfway down. It's a bullet point which was the council side councillors and officers explained that a full survey covering people's working patterns and challenges of working from home was being carried out, and that this was similar to the one that was carried out last year. I was just wondering if we've got any action plan from that survey.
Am I right in saying something, Liz, that you've got this on your side, points to raise later on? I mean, we could either do it here or we could do it under that. I mean, what's best? Liz?
Shall I deal with it quickly here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 1,300 responses to that large survey. It's been analysed at the moment, and we'll be reporting back in January and meeting with all colleagues, senior management team, leadership forum and trade unions to share the results of that survey in January.
Great, thank you for that, Liz. And at the bottom of that page, 9 of 38, this is about our pay campaign and our pay ballot. And I think you should have by now received our email where we're actually specifying what the dispute is all about in terms of pay, how our pay has been eroded over a number of years, that there's an increase in national insurance contributions, which is going to be a further erosion of our pay and our take-home pay. And what we're asking you to do as a council is to support us, but to also publicly state your support for us. And we've specified the issues in that letter, and I think I've sent it to all cabinet members. So can you just confirm that you've, 1, received it, and 2, that you're going to publicly support us?
So we've definitely received the letter. It arrived earlier today. You'll forgive me, given the how our diaries usually go on days like today, that I've not actually had the opportunity to read it in full. But of course, we will absolutely respond. Look, I mean, from our perspective, of course, we support public sector workers, particularly those who have seen sort of below inflation increases or freezes, quite frankly, to their pay over a considerable period of time. And as you and I both know, and I'm sure everybody on this call would agree, that we've seen sort of now 11 years of austerity, particularly in local government, and we also have a problem with the government sort of discussing a levelling up agenda that seeks to level down London and not to give London an equitable allocation of resources, particularly despite the fact that we know that the cost of living is substantially higher in London, and inflation really impacts London in a way that it perhaps doesn't in other parts of the country. So we're right alongside you, and likewise we totally appreciate we totally appreciate the support that trade unions equally offer to local councils when we make the arguments at this time of year to the government around our finance settlement, because of course we all know the way that the revenue support grant has gone over the last 11 years equally, so there is that huge gap. Let us read the letter. Obviously this is something that's nationally bargained for, and we obviously, of course, will always sort of seek to deliver whatever is nationally bargained for, and it gives it a bit of time, and we'll formally respond to you, if that's all right.
Thank you. Your words are welcomed, but I just wanted to specify that a number of Labour authorities have made a public statement, and in particular Lambeth have actually made a strong statement of support. So I think it would be quite good if Ealing were to do that, particularly in light of the situation we're in during COVID and the new variant as well. We've all been working hard and delivering, as you quite rightly say, essential public services, and obviously we're mindful to next year and the elections in May as well. So I think it'll be a very good firm statement to be made in support of the your workforce, basically.
Yeah, and I don't want to all I'll say is, look, let us respond to the letter. We'll do it properly. We'll do it formally. We literally have seen it in my inbox, but haven't been able to read the content. But I think it's fair to say, from an administration's perspective, you do know where our heart lies on this. And if we could, well, quite frankly, I think everybody deserves a pay rise. Probably the question is, what's that national negotiation going to look like? What's the impact on us? And therefore, what do we need to do in terms of our budget setting this year? But look, it's a shared agenda. We need more resources for the local government so that we can pay workers what they need to be paid, quite frankly. But we will definitely respond to you in good time.
Thank you. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues wish to contribute to this.
If it's okay, I'll say something in the schools section. That's fine.
Okay, cool.
But totally, you don't have to read it, Councillor Mason. You just sign it off, and that's fine.
Right. Should we go to employee side items then? Or have you got any other matters arising for the minutes?
No, we're done on those. And if we go to our items, and I think we'll probably be able to zip through many of these,
right?
Because obviously we've got a new variant. We're in a slightly different, changing environment with the pernicious effects and the transmission rates in terms of this new variant, which is unknown quantities. Obviously, we don't know how how this is going to affect people, but we're in a different phase in terms of a continuing phase of the pandemic, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. So, in terms of council services and council delivery of services, I'm assuming, and we're looking for a statement from yourselves that it's going to be the same as usual, which is work from home where possible, take precautions, take care, follow health and safety guidance, and wear face masks inside and in all council buildings, as per the announcement from Paul. I'm assuming that's going to be the case, Peter.
Steve, do you want to respond to this?
Sure. Happy to reinforce the message that we've been giving since the beginning. That sort of careful, gradual, and voluntary in terms of working out of the office, and I guess at the moment more careful than perhaps people might have been thinking they needed to be a couple of months ago. As you say, I don't know what we can never work out if it's more steps forwards or more steps back at the moment, but it is something of a dance. So we will continue the policy of being careful and supporting our people in working from home that we've had up to this point. I don't think there's any question of that.
And just to add to that, Councillor Donnelly, I think it reflects both the conversations that we've had privately, but also the sort of words that I said at the first one of these that I chaired. This isn't necessarily just about what we do in the pandemic, but it's also about the lessons that we learn about flexibility and flexible working arrangements from now onwards. We're already starting to see the private sector and other parts of the public sector respond to what a new sort of normal looks like for working arrangements. I think we need to start thinking about it properly in the context of our future working arrangements in Ealing Town Hall and at Percival House, in terms of things that we know that are going to happen to both of those buildings in the medium to long-term future. But it really does beg the question of what is the future of the office working environment for office workers? And it may well be actually that we stick to the notion of home working arrangements for those that wish it, obviously always making and accommodating those who don't wish to have home working arrangements, but that the office, rather than becoming a place in which we becomes a factory of keyboard typing, instead becomes a place of meeting, of gathering, of collaborating, of co-creating, and therefore we use space in that way too. But that's a slightly longer term project on top of what Councillor Donnelly's given you some commitments now in terms of what those arrangements will be for the period that we remain in COVID requirements.
Thank you for that. And I think in terms of item 2, the update on recovery plan, I haven't seen anything coming up to SLT, to the virtual SLT. So I don't think that we're going to have any surprises, I hope, this side of Christmas. So we would probably be able to dispense with that item. Under item 3, in terms of the council budget savings structural review, we had some discussion about this at our last meeting. We all know the situation. We're circa £24–26 million deficit for next year. It's about how that gap is going to be closed, and obviously the structural review is an important one for us as well, because that's how we're going to be going forward in terms of delivery of services. And obviously with the departure of the chief executive, the interim, and your proposals to have a more permanent chief executive appointment is an important one. So it would be helpful for us to get some idea in terms of your thinking, in terms of how we're going to close the budget gap, when we're actually going to get to see the Solace report, which will be a really interesting one, and proposals for the chief executive, etc. The appointments schedule.
So, Councillor Donnelly, do you want to talk about sort of the budget gap? Then I'll come in on the interim and permanent chief executive arrangements. Yep,
happy to do that. We are in the process, in the middle of reviewing the budget setting position for all of the service departments for the next year. There's been a number of meetings, discussions about that already. Proposals have come forward. Some areas, as you might imagine, will prove easier to find resolution for than others, given the challenges that they face. But I'm not going to make any statements about where we are about specific budgets. We've sought advice from Newton Europe, as you're aware, in finding a different angle, look for new innovative ways of finding savings that we might not otherwise have got, either because our officers didn't have the resource to look for them, or just in terms of using external experience to find things that perhaps we've not run across before. And we're very comfortable that we're going to more than make our money back by a considerable distance on the money we invest in that consultancy. We expect to have information about the local government settlement next week, although rumours were circulating today in some quarters that might not happen, but fingers crossed that it actually will. And that will give us a view as to how close to that figure of 25 million that you referred to will need to continue to be. We're ever optimistic. I'm not sure that's technically true. Nothing the government's done in the last few years would cause one to believe that a miracle is going to occur and funds are going to flood in our direction. But all parts of the organisation are working hard to deliver their part in the savings that we'll need to make to balance the budget to keep our employees and your members in jobs.
Suman, I've got Adam's hand up as well. It might be worth sort of, if you've got follow-up questions specifically on budgets, do them now, and then we can do the chief exec bit.
Okay, well, that's helpful. Thank you for that. And it's something that I've raised with Hitesh because he's chairing the overview and scrutiny, and particularly in terms of the equality plan. And I've said to him, look, we've had year on year out salami slicing of and consultation proposals for job losses. And what we're keen to do is not to have those job losses at the front end again. We don't want job losses to begin with. We want more efficiencies and more raising of income elsewhere, if that's possible. But I've also said to Hitesh, well, let's do a review of, an audit of what's happened in the past. How many black people, how many women, how many people with disabilities have lost their jobs? Because anecdotally, the front end is predominantly black people and black women, and if we're serious about equalities and retaining staff and with our equalities agenda, we need to ensure that our EIAs are actually worth the paper they're written on, because at present they're quite meaningless. So we really need to grapple with this and understand how we are going to push forward the equalities agenda and not always cut at the bottom end.
Steve? And then Adam.
Well, I think none of us want to cut jobs, so we're agreed on that. I don't recall any of this being mentioned last week at Overview and Scrutiny when we discussed the equalities agenda. It certainly wasn't mentioned during the part of the meeting that I attended. So I'm not going to make any deep comment about it, other than I give you my commitment on behalf of the administration that we work to ensure that we behave in the most equal and equal opportunities orientated way. But beyond that, if there are other discussions to be had, then I'm happy to have them.
Sorry, can I just come in and say, Steve, you're absolutely right. I didn't raise it at the meeting, but I had a session with Hitesh prior to Overview and Scrutiny, so we did have the discussion then.
I'm sure it was a very enjoyable discussion, but it wasn't a discussion I was part of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what I'd say, to pick up the point about frontline staff, I think, we've got an agenda item later, haven't we, with the slide deck that was produced to OSC, and it gives us actually quite a clear picture of what the equalities situation with our workforce is. And it's not anecdotal that our frontline staff are disproportionately black and Asian. They are, absolutely. It tapers towards the senior management team, and that's something that we know an awful lot about. We've had a conversation before, but you are right. Frontline staff are disproportionately from BAME communities. Adam, Adam, is your question in relation to this issue, or is it, or would you want me to respond on Chief Executives first? And I think you're on mute as well, so you might just need to come off the mute.
Two things. One was just going back to the COVID. I understand that the potential plan B of the government may be, if this wave with Omicron ends up at sometime in January, is that a general working from home policy might be something they move to. And I guess the question is how the council will respond to that if that happens. And then on the budgets, I mean, I asked this question of the previous administration. Councillor Johnson may recall some years ago. I understand the dilemma for a Labour authority in that, you know, you're faced with having to decide where to cut. I mean, the lesson from the past for this authority must be surely, you know, with park rangers, for example, that, you know, lots of authorities cut their park rangers. Ealing quite rightly didn't, and now you've got 23 green flags across the borough as a result of, you know, partly, but as a result of having your park rangers in place. The question really is, at what point do Labour councils say, actually, we cannot continue to make these austerity cuts? We actually need to start challenging the government on this, rather than effectively being party to what their agenda, which is essentially what Labour councils unfortunately end up doing now, deciding between, you know, cutting off your foot or cutting off your hand, essentially.
Yeah, and I take that, Adam. The challenge, of course, with that is that we've got a statutory duty to set a balanced budget, and in not doing so now isn't just a civil offence, it's a criminal offence. And, you know, and those are rules that the government changed, and they changed them in the last 11 years. So it's no longer just a question of whether or not we have to implement Tory cuts. We don't like doing it. Of course we don't. The question is, do we just sort of consistently cycle through a pattern in which Labour leaders of local authorities just get sent to jail to be replaced by other Labour leaders of councils who then get sent to jail, and or worse than that, we end up in a situation where the government impose commissioners to do it anyway. And, you know, I would argue, as you can imagine, I'd rather it be us making some difficult decisions, protecting the front line, protecting the most vulnerable, than it would be government-imposed commissioners. Because you talk about salami slicing, they'll be sort of cutting off. They'll be cutting off limbs. Steve?
Yeah, just in terms of the specific, what will we do if the government changes the rules? Well, if they move to a general position of working from home, that's what we'll do. One would expect that it would be that brackets, with the exception of designated exceptions that in terms of the type that we had right back to the spring of last year. Well, we know how to do that, and we'd do it again. I'd say we're as well equipped as any local authority to manage that. I'd also say that we have probably returned less to the office than the vast majority of local authorities. So I think we're in a strong position to respond to whatever occurs in that regard. And also, I just that the myth that we or other Labour councils do not challenge just has to be rebutted. You know, the fact that we're not successful in overturning what the Conservative government wants to do doesn't mean to say that we don't challenge it. It's just it is where we are, and we have no choice, as Councillor Mason says, but to set a balanced budget. Not only, you know, do innocents like Councillor Mason, Councillor Johnson, myself end up going to jail or whatever, but somebody else comes in from outside and implements whatever cuts they want to make, and not decisions that are conducted by elected representatives of the people of Ealing.
So let me just let me talk about then a little bit about where we are on the chief executive and sort of the wider structural stuff. So we do. So of course, you know, Paul has announced his decision to leave the organisation, and we're going to be at next full council meeting doing two things. Number one, saying thank you to Paul for his service to the organisation over these last 5.5, 6 years, and all of the effort that he's done, particularly in the wake of COVID. And overseeing what has been an incredibly difficult period for local government. but also appointing an interim head of paid service for the period until we are able to make a permanent appointment. The idea of the permanent appointment hopefully will be that we can go out to recruit in the new year, and at least have the name via a chief officer's appointment panel, as is the normal route and process, hopefully by sometime in March. And what I've sort of, and having had discussions with officers about what the next 6 months therefore might look like, knowing that of course it's going to take a bit of time for a new chief executive to be onboarded, and even with the interim arrangements, is that we actually need to be in a position whereby the chief executive has the ability and latitude to sort of do a bit of a review of the organisation themselves, to sort of kick the tires and to do a bit of a gap analysis on where we think that we want to be, both as an administration and operationally, and give them some latitude to be able to sort of make decisions at the appropriate time about any sort of structural review or operating model. So I think it's fair to say that you should anticipate that we're not going to seek to make any major changes, structural or otherwise, in the next 6 months. And of course, it might take the new chief executive a little bit of time once they're onboarded to consider what that looks like. But the administration is really clear about what we are seeking to achieve in sort of the 2022 period beyond with the new chief executive, which is a much more collaborative, open and transparent way of the members and officers working with the public, and really making sure that we sort of make significant progress on culture change within the organisation that reflects some of the internal work that no doubt has been done around equality, diversity, inclusion, but also picking up the themes that I'm sure will come from the pieces of work that we're doing on reviewing our engagement strategy, as well as I'm sure any recommendations that come out of the Race Equality Commission report that I think we're going to probably see now in January, given unfortunately a few instances of COVID and ill health. But that is the direction of travel that we're going in. And in many senses, this is actually a really exciting opportunity for the whole organisation, staff, members, and the public, sort of really engage in a process about the type of council that we want to be, and where we want to put our priorities, and how we want to work, and what that culture looks like. So that gives you a bit of a timetable, I guess, and some assurance about what that 6-month period looks like.
Okay, thank you. Can I suggest, Peter, that item 4 we've dealt with in terms of the minutes, where we'll get something in the new year. Item 5, working from home guidance, it's much as it is now, continue as we are, work from home where possible. We may have to review that in light of what Adam said about the government moving to phase 2 of or is it plan B? I can never remember as they're making it up as they go along. And I think we've dealt with the staff survey and action plan, because Liz has spoken about the number of responses, and that we'll get some report in January. So there you go. I've cut down the agenda for you.
So I think, is Danny leading the schools section then?
He is.
And thanks very much. I was expecting 20 minutes or so. I was going to make a cup of tea first. Sorry about that. Thanks, everybody. Similar points to the last meeting, I'd like to sort of raise here and hopefully work towards trying to resolve. But first up, more on that, on the pay ballot. So in terms of schools, as you'll know, this pay ballot is a national Unison pay ballot, which is for schools and council workers who are all on NJC paying conditions, which is the majority of Ealing maintained schools and quite a few academies. So we are balloting around 350,000 members across the country. The letter will explain an awful lot more about how that is going to work. It's a 6-week period from starting last Wednesday, the 1st of December, all the way through to the 14th of January. And our members are angry about pay because we have lost 25% of our wage in real terms since 2010. And a lot of that has come as a result of pay freezes, pay reductions, pay cuts, people losing their jobs, and people really not being able to get by earning what they earn. So the letter also goes on to explain a lot more about the specifics of everything, price rises in terms of inflation, which is at 4.2%. The fact that we've tried nationally to negotiate as much as possible with the employer, the NJC, but those negotiations have come to an end without an acceptable payoff, which has been 1.75%, which is not a pay rise. It's not even a pay. It's not even keeping up to date with our pay. So our members in schools are very angry about that too, and we've written to our head teachers, and we would urge you, not only if you're considering getting behind us and the GMB and Unite about this, that you also communicate with local head teachers, with schools and local governing bodies, and urge your councillor colleagues who are governors in schools to make sure that governors are aware that this is happening, and that they will support our campaign and also support us if we do indeed decide to take that decision to take industrial action as a last resort. So thank you for that. We will be sharing the letters as well with our members so that they do want to know what your response is, and obviously lots of them will be residents of the borough. And we're really keen to get behind you in the election, I'm sure, but also because you will stand for certain things. You stand for what is right and is fair. I can give you all the statistics you like about pay. You all know that ultimately what's been offered isn't good enough, and people should have a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. And that's not been happening. In terms of the last meeting, I mentioned to you that there were some instances of jobs being advertised in schools that are lower than the real living wage. And yes, we do raise that with HR. That's what I know that the minute said, that you as councillors are saying that we should raise that with HR, and we do that. But we've had 2 more cases of it since our last meeting, and we have raised again with the head of schools HR and with the HR consultant for that school. But it's worrying because these 2 jobs again were advertised on the Ealing Council Schools vacancy website, and the jobs they were actually for school canteen assistant cooks. This school bought the service back in-house, so they were on Ealing contracts, and went away from the Harrison ISS model, and have ended up earning less than they did on when they were privately outsourced. So we are working with HR to get that sorted, but again, we don't want to have to keep being so vigilant as to pick this up, and members contacting us saying this job's advertised, that job's advertised. So we really want some leadership from you as the council as well, and if you can speak to the councillors with responsibility for the recruitment pages within the ELP as well, to make sure that there is proper scrutiny of these adverts before they go up, because I can see, if I'm being really, really kind one day, I can see why maybe one person in a school misses a figure, but it should be burned in our minds that we're paying no lower than what was £10.85, which is now £11 fine. So that's happening again, and that's causing us some concern, and obviously concern for our members. So we will update you, but we would appreciate your input too in that, and really flagging that up, because we don't want to have to keep raising this in this forum. Similarly, with some job descriptions and job evaluation, we're going to continue to talk with schools HR and possibly with you as well, Liz, about making sure that job evaluation is done properly and prudently in accordance with our local Ealing GLPC agreed scheme. In terms of long COVID, we unfortunately, neither Sukminder or I were able to make a meeting with schools HR to discuss this, but I am going to reach out again to Mark and try and catch up with him on it, because I know that there's been a meeting arranged to discuss guidance on this, and we are getting more casework with members who are really struggling. Some are really struggling. I'm not saying it's hundreds of people, but it's getting into the double figures now of people whose illness is life changing, not just for the work that they're not able to do, but also for their daily lives. And often the members who contracted COVID were working on that front line at the time in schools. We can't prove where they contracted COVID. I don't think anyone can prove where anybody contracts it, but we're really keen for you as a local authority to be supportive as an employer in that, in supporting the idea of extending sick pay, for example, in special circumstances, which is something we can do through our conditions of service, and making managers aware that those things are possible, because we do hear from lots of heads and lots of managers who say, well, there's nothing we can do, it's out of our hands, when actually it's not. There are lots more measures of support that can take place, and our members don't want to seek to extend sick pay. They wouldn't take that decision lightly, and they don't ask for our support in doing that lightly either. But it's about understanding that long COVID means much longer phased returns than the usual 4 to 6 weeks in many circumstances, and more reasonable adjustments lasting for longer periods of time. And I think it's also about employers, schools, and us as a council, you as a council here, to maybe look at how the model works for getting people back to work, because a lot of things that support people in this circumstance are quite simple things. For example, really dark rooms that people can take a break in. People who have long COVID really benefit from those more regular breaks, but in areas that are actually a lot more isolated and darkened and quiet. So we'll continue to work on behalf of members with the schools for that. Let me just have a quick look and make sure that was everything I had. I think that's everything I had on schools right now. And so we will wait to hear your response in terms of that letter. We wrote our letter to all head teachers too about pay, and I'm sure we'll have further conversations once we hear back from you on those points. But if you could really consider that if about job advertisements and making sure schools are clear, we're saying it to them, to all heads, we've written to them, but from a council point of view, we need to make sure that this doesn't keep happening, because we don't know how many other cases there are at the moment. And as you know, Councillor Mason and Donnelly, when we discovered what was going on with the Ealing Schools catering contract, that was huge. That was a real dark day, really, for the council to discover that we had so many people, 300 people on the minimum wage working in Ealing schools with colleagues who were earning £2-3 more an hour than they were to do the same thing. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Danny. I must admit, so it may be that I've missed the letter, or it might be in the content of the one that was sent today. Is it a separate one?
So we've written, so yeah, it's separate. I wrote to head teachers last Wednesday.
Oh, right.
And that was, and then the cabinet letter, I believe, Minda sent from the Ealing Unison addressed today. It's a similar letter, okay, but it's got
some of the education stuff. Yeah, no, and so once we've had sort of time to sort of read and process it, I'm sure we'll respond substantively on the issue of sort of the advertising of non-London living wage jobs. I think from our perspective, that feels to me, and it probably is an oversight. We deliberately, in the context of the schools catering contract, made it very clear that the continued use of the council's procurement capacity was the thing that was going to be withdrawn if schools weren't willing to meet the London living wage. And equally, of course, we're spending so much of our resource and capacity at the moment trying to talk to the private sector and to other public sector organisations to drive an increase in London living wage accreditation. And as you know, it's one of our key performance indicators. I think we could do even better, and we're going to think about making announcements around that, perhaps for a little thing in May, and give ourselves an even more ambitious target over the next 4 years. But we can't therefore put ourselves in a situation where, because of the great work that the Living Wage Alliance did along with the trade unions to get us in a position whereby we're forcing London living wage through our contracts, that we then allow schools to withdraw from those contracts and circumnavigate the system by using, again, council resources to not pay the London living wage. Now, that does seem to me to be an unfortunate situation that's been allowed to happen, but we're certainly going to clamp down on it. And another thought popped into my head, which has gone away again, but it might come back. But yeah, no, an oversight that we're going to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. Steve?
Thanks. Yeah, essentially, you said what I was going to say. My suspicion is that this is largely a transactional process. People haven't been, it's not been triaged traditionally, certainly not in terms of verifying what the rates of pay are. That's my guess. But we will take away to do that because, as the leader has said, we're not in the business of advertising variation from our policy. You know, that's a rather foolish thing for us to do.
I remember the thing that I was going to say, which is, of course, that we can't physically stop schools from paying below the London living wage, but they could certainly not use the council's resources to do it. So that's the point. Do you want to come back in, Danny?
Right. If that's all right, thank you. I can't find my hand. Well, I know where my hands are, but I can't find that one. Sorry. I'm a bit delirious today now, this evening. What was I going to say? I was going to say that I do appreciate that commitment where you said, the clamping down, and from you, Councillor Donny, as well. And I don't doubt that for a second, but obviously we did raise this at the last meeting and it's happened again in that interim. So I also can appreciate, and I think I did make it clear that I can appreciate somebody may have made an oversight, it might have been an innocent mistake, but I think there needs to be a bit more of a concrete ideas about how we're going to make sure this is clear for schools. So actually some material that is sent to schools that says this is the real living wage, from the council, from HR and shared services, from the Ealing Learning Partnership, because they have a recruitment and retention committee. So whilst obviously we approach those committees to say, here's, we want to work with you, we're not the employer, and you hopefully will, if we can both do it, then we can have a sort of two-pronged approach to it, and that's good. And on not being able to force schools to pay, I think we do have a slight difference of opinion, only because if many of these schools, locally maintained schools, will have Ealing contracts of employment, and as such, Ealing is an accredited real living wage employer. So not only would that school technically not be, allowed to use your Ealing services, but there could be a real contractual difficulty there for the school legally and for the council legally. So obviously, we don't want to be in the business of compelling people and using those types of words. But I think that schools, local authority schools, do have to pay that, and I think it's important that that's the Unison position on that. Right there on that, Linda and my trade union colleagues. Yeah, thank you.
Message received loud and clear. Do you want to move on to the next one, Linda, or is there anything else on schools?
I think we've wrapped up the schools issue, but item 8.
Adam made a point in the chat there, Linda. Sorry, Adam's made a point. It might be worth picking up.
I think Adam suggested, can we explore getting some specialist long COVID advice and support for employees, managers, and occupational health? And I would support that suggestion, because it'd be certainly helpful to know what other local authorities are doing in terms of support and specialist advice. And if they're not doing anything, then maybe we should be setting a trend here in Ealing.
I think that's a commitment we can make, Liz, can't we? We can certainly take a look. Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you. In terms of item 8, inequality, Liz and I spoke about putting this on the agenda as a kind of joint agenda to make this item more meaningful, because we've normally had a verbal report, and this was done in advance of an invitation for us to speak at overview and scrutiny. But I think it's helpful for committee members to get this briefing. I think it's important as a baseline, because this is showing our situation where we are now, and it's about what the action plan is actually going to mean, the timescales for that action plan, and is there going to be meaningful change that we want to see happen. And obviously we want to see that change happening already, but we'll let Liz introduce this item.
Thank you for that. Thank you, councillors. So we know we've got a distance to go on this. The report shows us that we have, disproportionate number of staff, particularly in terms of ethnicity, Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff in the higher graded jobs, sort of middle management upwards. We've got a number of actions in place, but we do know this is going to take time, that the pipeline for staff coming through and the opportunities for them and the development is going to take time to put in place. I think we need to set some agreed targets, and we've already spoken to the services about their data sets because it's very different in different services. And we're going to be working with them between now and in the new year in January to set targets in Pacific services about what are they actually going to do with their part of the workforce, what are their plans, what are the aspirations of all those staff. So I think we've got a fairly clear action plan now. And I know councillors have committed to supporting the equalities agenda in terms of resources. So I'm confident that we should be able to put together some more definite timelines on that action plan now about what we're going to deliver and when we're going to deliver that, working with the services. Is there anything Pacific, Saminda, you want me to pull out on that came to mind? I mean, everyone's got a copy of the report and it's published as well.
I think, Liz, it was a useful meeting. There were some useful suggestions, such as doing a BAME pay gap analysis, because and that was agreed, and it was also agreed to look at the agency and the interims and the non-standard workers, the makeup of those individuals as well, because obviously they're not directly employed, but they are employed by other means. So, are we reflective? Is our workforce reflective of the community that we serve? Is I think the best way of putting it. And I think there were a number of other recommendations from overview and scrutiny, which were quite good as well. It's really about the action plans, and it's about I did raise the issue, which is that the departments have had their statistics for some time now, and what have they done so far in terms of pooling together some action plans which can be consulted upon, because I think that's the major issue here, which is obviously we don't want a top-down approach. We want a partnership approach with all of the groups, and obviously with the trade unions as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know for a fact that definitely two services have got some draft action plans together, so that's good progress. So we're making good progress, I think. But we have committed that we will sort out our HR resourcing so that we can free up people to support the services to do that piece of work, and then work with yourselves and the business partners to see if this is meaningful action plans and if we're all in agreement that this is going to make a difference. So that's the services are in control of the workforce to a certain extent in terms of who they recruit, and I know we're looking at recruitment as well, but it is really important we get some targeted action plans, and then we can have an overarching one that pulls together what the services are doing as well as specific activities that we're undertaking from HR. Just to come back on the previous point, actually, when you were talking about people that leave the organisation, so we've now, and we'll be consulting between now and Christmas and early in the new year on an exit survey that we're going to be doing with people that choose to exit the organisation as well, so we can gain some more meaningful data around that. And I think another key action that we agreed upon that I will be writing out to staff that haven't disclosed their protected characteristics for a whole range of issues. And that represented quite a large chunk of the workforce. We've got 412 people, I think, whose data we don't have. So we really want to encourage, and working with the groups and the staff equalities groups, to encourage people to do that. But I'll be writing to people, and we agreed that I'll be talking to you about how we're going to communicate that, how we're going to make people feel confident that their information is confidential. However, it doesn't help us understand the workforce if we don't have that data.
Yeah, I think we had that conversation about the exit interviews as being an important facet of all of this, but only if it is kept confidential, because we don't. People fear what this might have in terms of an effect on their references. Particularly if you're claiming your manager has harassed or bullied you, or has been discriminatory practices against you, etc. The issue of non-disclosure of people's ethnic identities, we've given you the offer that if we can assist in any way, we're happy to do so. And I think the last one that we raised was about mandatory training for managers, which is, instead of there being training available, it has to be mandatory. It has to be a requirement that managers have to go through this training before they are able to do anything.
And we're in agreement on that, as you know, and it's about making sure then that we feed back the data and that we close the gaps on that, and that people are held accountable for making sure it happens in services as well.
Thank you.
Demi?
Yeah, so my question is on exit interview. How would you use the data and how, when I asked that question, it's because I sat on one and the feedback we got from it was that there isn't much they can do with that, with what was said. So it would be nice to know how you're going to use the data that you get from the people that will be having this interview, and what impact that will have in moving forward in changing issues that's been raised.
Thanks, Kerry. So my quick response to that one is that we're going to actually put in place a confidential survey that anyone can access confidentially, that will only be viewed by myself and my two senior business partners, okay, in terms of confidentiality. It will give an option for people to say, do they want to actually have a face-to-face exit interview, which we can then offer. In terms of the actual survey data, what we're hoping is that we'll look for patterns and trends of behaviour. So we'll be asking people, which services do you work, where do you work, which service, what were the issues for exiting? It could be that actually someone's exiting for a positive reason, their career progression, we weren't able to offer them because we didn't have the spaces available, their next opportunity, and they're going to another local authority, which we'd support, of course. But then we need to look at the more negative reasons for why people exit. And, we've discussed this with your group, I know as well, that, with the staff equality groups, if there's patterns arising, whether it's to do with race or women's or whatever, we need to look at what those issues are in a confidential manner and consider, what do we actually do, what can we do? And we may not be able to do something for everything, but I'm sure there are actions we can take to make a difference in those spaces. So I think the online survey will be useful because it will start gathering the information, but we will also offer face-to-face interviews. And if it's face-to-face, we'll be saying to people, what you say to us is confidential. What are you happy for us to know, and what you're happy for us not to disclose? That's that's the nature of how it needs to be. Otherwise, people will not trust us. And this is about trust. And therefore, it needs to be limited as well about who has the data. But at the same time, if there's patterns appearing, we would need to feedback if there's a pattern in a particular service, for example, a particular issue, then we would need to feedback. But we don't actually have to say this is the group of staff that said this. We can say it has come to our attention. We are aware that there are some issues in this space and we need to work with you to address those.
The other thing I want to touch on was the one that Sukumida mentioned about mandatory training. And I know we've raised this so many times. And I think one of the key issue was accountability. And I know you've just said that, but I'm hoping that it's not just lip service and that there will be accountability from from management, that they will make sure managers goes on training, or whoever needs to go on training, to get the right relevant training, because that is really very, very, very important at the moment, because we just seem to be getting people, some goes, some don't, and nothing's done, nothing's literally done. So I hope that it's not lip service and really some action will be taken to ensure that everybody is consistent, the training is consistent across all the department.
I don't know if Councillor Donnelly might want to comment on the holding people to account part of that, possibly.
Well, if that's all right, Chair. Yeah. I mean, I'm always I'm not wary about making things mandatory. I think it's reasonable. My perception, looking around the organisation, is that we don't have a shortage of things that are mandatory. What we sometimes have a shortage of is things that are done, and that's not the same. That's not the same thing. So I want us to be clear within the organisation of what needs to be mandatory, and where something needs to be mandatory, that it is done, that it's accounted for, and that if people don't fulfil their responsibilities, they are called upon to explain them. And I think that's true in terms of the full range of managerial responsibilities, of which this is clearly a very important part.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay.
Kemi.
So, are there any more questions on this item then? No?
No.
So I think we're moving on to health and safety then.
Well, is it any update on item 9, which is wellbeing and mental health? Because again, we're as specified earlier, the COVID pandemic scenario continues with us. So just wondering if there's any new and different initiatives.
Apologies, I'm getting confused between the employer side items number 8 versus the agenda item number 7. But no, you're all right to pick us up on wellbeing and mental health. Liz?
Yeah, so we continue to monitor sickness absence and therefore patterns and trends on that. We're looking at the data most days and at least weekly at the moment. We have seen a pattern of stress and sort of mental health seems to be going up. So we're just looking at the patterns of that in terms of which services, which particular groups of staff that's with at the moment. And that's a report that I've got to take back to SLT Senior Leadership Team next week. So I'm very happy to share that data with trade union side as well. We've got a raft of resources in place still, and we'll continue to provide both face-to-face workshops that we've done. We've used Tom Oxley in the past year quite a lot to do some really good workshops with staff and with managers, and all the resources online, and we'll continue to promote that, and probably we need to promote it as we go into the festive season and remind people of all the things that are available to them when they've, because we won't be seeing people for a while over that period.
Thanks, Liz.
Do you want to do number 10? Any other issues relevant to COVID?
I think Danny wants to make a point.
Oh, sorry,
there.
Danny, I didn't see
That's all right.
Go for it. Sorry.
Don't worry. It's a quick one there on which slightly relates to the idea of a survey and also what workplace options are available, and just thinking that the council, it might be nice for there to be a bit of outreach into schools. I understand that you're not directly employing schools, and that schools have 2 contracts, the governors and the Ealing contracts, but the well-being and mental health of our members in schools is really important too. And if that can be encouraged through the ELP, again, to try and make sure that schools are surveying their staff and that people do feel comfortable and confident talking. And I have to say, I have noticed, I think it was 2 schools in the last few weeks where they had previously bought into some workplace options, but don't now. So members in those schools can't access the free services that they used to be able to, counselling and online things. I'm not saying that they solve every problem, but it's good practice for employers to have those. And I'm wondering, Liz, what sort of corporate services are available for school staff as well? Are there any that are available for everyone who works on an Ealing contract? And if not, maybe we could something I could try to take up with the ELP and see what packages might be able to be provided.
Yeah, happy to discuss that, Danny, with the schools team and ELP. Actually, quite a lot of the resources we're using for the workforce are free. So I think what we probably need to do is just check that all the schools are aware of the things that we tap into that don't cost us anything. And there's a government scheme we use as well, so we're signpost to that as well.
That would be very helpful. Thanks, Liz. If you're happy to forward me any of those details, and I can try and take that up as well. But thank you, Liz.
Will do.
Okay, so Tim.
Oh, right. Sorry, item 10, which is, I'll try and put this in a couple of sentences. It's really about asking you what progress is in terms of implementing and signing the Ethical Care Charter, and where we are in terms of a review of contractors, because you were going to do a major piece of work to understand when the contracts are coming up and what the costs element will be, etc. So we're very keen to ensure that the Unison Ethical Care Charter is implemented completely, and we're also very keen to ensure that the London living wage is paid to by all of our contractors as well, because I'm horrified at the state of the care sector, for example. It's mandatory vaccinations taking place, the loss of some care staff. But again, like many other council workers, they've been working all the way through the pandemic, putting their lives at risk, etc. And their rates of pay are appalling, really appalling, for the valuable, essential key work that they undertake for all of our loved ones, in these care homes. And I was dismayed, and it was no surprise to watch a panorama program last night of those companies that are hiving off millions of pounds, after claiming that they had no money, and hiving off at least £5 million from one company to their tax-free havens, whilst staff who are delivering the service are living hand to mouth on this, and the cost of living. We've spoken about the pay rise for local government workers. The cost of living is extortionate, and inflation, from Bank of England today said, that it's comfortably going to be in the region of 5% early next year. And it's, how are people going to afford to remain living in London and remain able to go to work if they're not paid properly?
Steve, do you want to offer an update on that?
So in terms of the Care Charter, our commitment remains as it has been. We, in terms of London Living Wage, I think as at least one person on the call was aware, we conducted a detailed review of our contracts. We were, I think, able to identify that really the main outstanding issues around living wage are in the care sector, which won't, I think, come as a surprise to anybody. And what we've been seeking to do, and will be able, I think, to make public these arrangements over the course of the coming weeks and months, is to have plans in place to move anything that isn't currently London Living Wage compliant to compliance within the shortest period that's achievable within the terms of the contract, the individual contract, which might sound a bit long-winded and technical, but it is the fastest and the best that's achievable in practice within a reasonable time scale.
Can I just ask you, so you're going to do it on a phased basis?
Well, it's a contract by contract basis.
Yes.
So we're addressing each contract. We're addressing the circumstances of each contract, and as each contract comes towards renewal, at and around renewal, we build in circumstances that move us as quickly as we can to living wage compliance.
I think it would be helpful to have some discussion outside of this meeting, because the devil's in the detail, and it's I've got to be quite frank. It's not happening as quickly as we'd like it to happen. Would like it to happen ASAP across the board in terms of the contracts.
Well, Steve, can I come in on this?
Certainly.
Yeah. So I think, there's actually a really bigger question that we need to sort of have a conversation about in terms of the future of the adult social care market, not least as a consequence of COVID. We know already that as a borough, we are a net importer, if you like, of people who are in adult social care beds, either in residential or nursing care facilities. And a lot of those placements are outside of our control. A lot of those placements are from neighbouring boroughs, or even different boroughs from outside of London on the other side. And what it means is that there are some complex arrangements, right? So, the local authority, any local authority, can be a London Living Wage employer, can sign up to the Unison Ethical Care Charter, and we can certainly give a care facility or a provider a London Living Wage in terms of the rates that we pay for the award of a contract. But we have no guarantee that they will be that they can, as a provider, be solvent in the context of other London boroughs not paying the London Living Wage for their contracts. And so what it means is, it's not about commitment. As Steve says, this is a question of when, not if, and we know it's a commitment we've got to make through contracting arrangements. But there is some tricky stuff in the adult social care market. Likewise, we know that there are facilities in Ealing that are running at 80% capacity when their break-even point is 95%. And we've already seen a number of providers actually go to the wall in the last 2 years, and potentially some challenges in the market that might be ahead. Now, that tells you something about sort of the instability of the adult social care market and whether or not it needs to be market full stop. But we've given a very, very clear intent that we want to be able to meet all of the demands that are in the Unison Ethical Care Charter. But there are those, we are now in that point of being in the sort of the intractable, very, very difficult elements of both contracting arrangements and the market right now. And it's not to say that we don't want to do it, but actually we're going to have a bigger conversation about adult social care more broadly, because it's, these issues aren't going away at all.
I suggest we meet outside of this meeting.
Yeah, very, very, very happy to do that. Steve, sorry, I cut across you, Steve, but I just thought I want to do get the wide angle in there a bit.
I was going to make exactly some of those points that it's multidimensional, that actually some of the most vulnerable providers are amongst the people who are in most trouble on this. And actually, we can push, but they've got nowhere to go. And the other side of it, of course, is the so-called reform of social care, which is no such thing, has actually added uncertainty to these providers, because all they can see is that there are limits to what they're going to be allowed to charge in the future, with absolutely no information about where the recompense will come, and that applies to us as a social care provider. We have no idea where the balance above £86,000 is going to come from. But the government's made clear where its priorities lie, and the rest of us somehow at the moment are scrambling to see how we're going to break even and provide the decent care services that people deserve.
I think, as I've said, let's discuss this outside of the meeting, because there are some care homes where we've got exclusively Ealing residents, and so we have a different scenario there. And I've spoken to one care provider yesterday, and they are getting the funding from other contracts, other boroughs, to pay London Living Wage, and they'd be happy to do that in Ealing if only Ealing were to stump up the money, as it were. And it's that basic, isn't it, really?
So very, very, very happy to sort of pick this up offline.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thank you.
Okay, so I think unless there's any more, Superman on number 10, because it's a bit because I think that one's a bit sort of A or B, isn't it? So I think we go back to sort of the main agenda item, but you can let us know if you feel that we've covered those issues off, or if you want to do them in more detail, because they are standing items. So one is the workforce equality update.
I think we've covered that.
Yeah. And then the health and safety update.
I don't have anything specifics. I think it's welcome that we've finally been invited to the Health and Safety Board for the meeting that we were excluded from, and it was useful that Steve actually turned up at the last meeting, and that was good as well, because it then gives it the priority and the importance that, you know, health and safety, we need to drive the change and maintain good standards across the organisation.
Steve, I think I should definitely allow you to respond to that.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Savinda. Yeah, certainly it is a priority of mine. I was pleased to attend, and I propose to continue to do so. And I hope to see you there.
I hope they still send the invite for me.
Right, I think you have that commitment. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so that concludes the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. We will see each other again on the 1st of February next year. So until then, have a wonderful Christmas break, a winter period, and a new year. And we'll see you all in the new year. So take care.
Thanks all.